Pleased to be with you.
I wanted to start by asking you, there's a famous Doomsday Clock based on what a lot of experts perceive to be the moment the world basically ends. That clock is now heading towards the dreaded midnight. You're 94 years old. You've had an extraordinary life. You've seen lots of things, not least world wars. What do you think about the state of the world right now? And are we right to be perhaps concerned that doomsday is on its way?
Well, the Doomsday Clock was set in 1947, shortly after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At that point, it was 7 minutes to midnight. Later, the analysts abandoned minutes altogether, moved to seconds. It's now set at 90 seconds to midnight for good reasons. We're now facing questions that have never arisen in human history. They will have to be answered soon, or else we're essentially finished. One, of course, is the threat of nuclear war, which is growing both in Europe and in Asia. The other is the inexorable march towards climate destruction. We have a couple of decades in which to deal with it. Methods are pretty well known. If we don't pursue them, we will pass irreversible tipping points, and there will be a steady decline to undescribable catastrophe. That's where we stand now.
I mean, I would add a third to that, potentially, purely based on what Professor Stephen Hawking told me in what turned out to be his last television interview, which when I asked him what was the biggest threat to mankind, he said when artificial intelligence learns to self-design, then that's it. There are some experts out there in the world of AI who believe we may be approaching that eventuality. What's your view of AI and that threat?
I think that's mostly science fiction. I mean, in principle, it is possible to reach what's called singularity, to reach a point where AI might move on independently, but this is such a remote contingency that I really don't see any. It doesn't seem to me worth considering very seriously, especially when we think of the imminent catastrophes that are quite real.
On the catastrophes that you outlined, taking the first one of nuclear war, how close do you think we're getting to that potentially happening with this war in Ukraine? In other words, if Ukraine with its offensive was to push Vladimir Putin back, if it looked like back home in Russia he may be losing the war or is even driven out altogether, do you think he's potentially the kind of person who might actually use a nuclear weapon to seize back initiative?
It's conceivable. Tactical nuclear weapons have apparently been placed in Belarus. The West is taking a ghastly gamble. They're assuming that if Russia faces defeat, which does not look too imminent, but if they do, that Vladimir Putin will pack his bags, slink away silently to oblivion or worse, and will not use the weapons that everyone knows he has to escalate the war up to the point of attacking NATO supply lines in Western Ukraine, in which case there's growing confrontation with NATO. Once you step on the escalation ladder, it's very hard to stop. So it's possible.
OK, let's move to another issue I think we have more common ground on. Free speech, it seems to me, has never been under more ferocious attack in the West than it is right now. Why is that, and what do we do about it?
There definitely is an attack on freedom of speech, even freedom to read. In the United States, Ron DeSantis, running for president, as he just announced, has imposed regulations, laws in Florida, which make it illegal to teach authentic American history. You have to teach a kind of history which glorifies the United States, nothing about what actually happened. This is happening in Republican legislatures around the country. The libraries are being forced to throw out books. There's laws passed to say there are topics you're not allowed to talk about.
Well, he would
You
argue,
can't-
I mean, DeSantis would argue, I've interviewed him, he would argue that he is focused on things like critical race theory, which he feels is inappropriate for teaching young children. He thinks that gender ideology should not be taught to young children. And it has a lot of support. A lot of Floridians agree with him about this.
Critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Does anybody know? Critical race theory is a slogan invented by the right wing, and the person who invented it, Christopher Rufo, has been very open and frank. He says we just use this as a way to refer to everything we hate. If you want to know what critical race theory actually is, it's a small academic discipline which investigates systematic elements of racism in American education. So they certainly exist. It's never reached the schools. Schools wouldn't even know what it is. This is invented by the right wing, exactly as Rufo stated, to refer to everything we hate and want to destroy, like teaching American history, like teaching gender issues. We hate that, so we'll call it critical race theory.
Who has been for you the best American president of your lifetime, and who's been the worst?
In my lifetime, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
And the worst?
Too much competition, I'm afraid.
I know you're not a massive fan of Donald Trump. How do you feel about him running again?
No. If he runs again, it'll be a disaster for the world for many reasons. For one thing, Trump, as you saw during his first time, is dedicated. Actually, he has two commitments. One commitment is to himself. He's a megalomaniac, psychopath. All that concerns him is me. The other commitment is to serve corporate power and great wealth abjectly. His one legislative achievement was a huge tax gift to the ultra rich and the corporate sector, nothing else. But he is a major climate denialist. He denies that global warming is taking place. He wants to maximize the use of fossil fuels, including the most dangerous of them, and to eliminate regulations which might mitigate the catastrophe. That's a death sentence for the human species.
If we knew this was going to be our last day on Earth, I asked Professor Hawking this actually. I said, how would you spend it? And he said he would get his family together, he would play Wagner very loudly, and he would drink fine champagne. If you knew it was all about to end, how would you spend your last day?
I would get my family together, but skip the rest.
Finally, Noam Chomsky, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So fascinating. I could talk to you for hours. What would you like your legacy to be? If you could write your own heading on your own tombstone, here lies Noam Chomsky. What would you like the rest of that sentence to say?
He tried his best.
I think that's absolutely correct. And your best was extremely good and is extremely good. Noam Chomsky, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.